Hey friends, Seeking Our Spirits back with Brett. Another great episode for you, episode number 40 with a new friend of mine, Judith Rosenberg. It was great to sit down and talk with her, get to know her a little bit and hear about her journey. I'm probably going to have to do a part 2 because there was more to the journey there. So I hope Judith wants to come back on and hope that you enjoy. As always, best way to enjoy or to support the show is by coming on. So you all have a story, contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com to come on the show. You can also tell me a story, and we'll feature it on the show and discuss it. And you can call 615-933-9737 and just leave a message. And keep hitting the like buttons and the share buttons and support if you can. Really appreciate everybody's encouragement and support. It's been a lot of fun. And we'll keep on rolling. As I always say, too, we're on YouTube. Even if you don't listen on YouTube, go over there and hit subscribe and like or play some episodes. That helps us out, too. So hope you enjoy, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace. And there we are. So, Judith Rosenberg, thank you for inviting me into your home, your beautiful home, and taking a chance on a guy you haven't met in person. I appreciate it, and appreciate you being willing to come and chat with me and journey with me about spirituality. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. Great to meet you.
Yeah. And so just to kick things off, why don't you just say, just bio.
Absolutely.
Who's Judith? What have you done? Where are you from?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
The thing I turn in, when they say, "Oh, you're speaking," can you give us some background?
Yeah.
So, I am born and raised here in Knoxville. Not in this part of town that we're sitting in right now, but had a really great life here. My parents moved here in '66, and I was born several years later, and they never thought about going back. They moved from East Pennsylvania and loved it here.
Mm-hmm. That was before you were born?
Before I was born, yeah. And loved it here and wanted to just...
Of course, 66.
Yeah.
Sorry, Judith.
No. I'm old. It's not that far off there. Come on, let's be real. I embrace age. We run towards age. That's... we can get into that if you want, but I don't shy away from age. But it wasn't that. I wasn't born that soon. And when, graduated high school here, I did go away to college. I went to Indiana University, go Hoosiers, and came back a few years later. And it was really it was never in the cards for me to want to stay. I came back for a dream job that actually ended up being a nightmare job.
Okay.
But that taught me a lot of lessons too. My career has been this interesting kind of back and forth between ad agency sector and marketing consulting life, and then also working within the nonprofit sector, and a stint of that actually working for a Jewish nonprofit that was focused on spirituality and identity development for teenagers.
Yeah.
So, kind of always been doing marketing work. It just kind of depends on the context. And now I started a business. We're in our 6th year with a couple of guys who, for anybody who listens and is familiar with the discovery acquisition of Scripps Networks Interactive, they were like lots of people and had opportunities to do other things when that acquisition happened. And they just kind of looked at each other and said, "Do you want to start something?"
Yeah.
And then they realized that they are great on creative strategy and muscle and design things and don't really understand a lot about clients and deadlines and project management and budgets and all those things that crazy clients kind of tend to want. So that's what I do now, is that I'm kind of front of house in this little firm we've built up. I do a little bit of content creation and some writing. I wouldn't really fancy myself a writer per se, but I do like to kind of dip a toe in from time to time.
Is it okay? What's the firm called? Is that okay?
It's called the Thought Bureau.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's 3 of us at our core, and the idea of the Bureau is that we bring in other people and folks we know and trust, and that we've developed relationships over the years when there's stuff that's not like straight up in our wheelhouse, and we bring that, and we're very transparent about that with our clients. But the fun thing now for me is that actually our client base is a lot of really cool nonprofits. Okay. So I get to do both.
Yeah, awesome.
It is awesome.
That's exciting. Exciting to do something new, right?
Yeah, and I feel super fortunate that I get to help out a lot of organizations who need it.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And So, as you know, the podcast is about spirituality, which sounds like you have had some experience working with folks with. And so excited to hear your story. So when you, Judith, think of what that very broad term is, where you sort of come into it in your life? Were you raised in, would you call your home life a spiritual home life, or did you have like an internal kind of spiritual life? What where do you start?
Well, I guess, we start at the beginning, and the beginning for me, I was raised here in Knoxville, Jewish. Mm-hmm. Now, what's fascinating about this is that my mother was raised Catholic and actually converted to Judaism.
Okay.
She started her own conversion process when my parents were living in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Something happened, which to this day, I don't know exactly what it is, but somebody or something really got her real mad, and she just sort of stopped the process.
Okay. Now, your father was Jewish. That's why she was converted.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Yeah.
And, when they met and ultimately decided to get married, they were first married by a justice of the peace in Pennsylvania. And then so when they moved here as Pat and Jean Rosenberg, and they joined the synagogue, which is one of the synagogues that's here on Kingston Pike, Heska Muna, which affiliated and still does with the conservative movement of American Judaism.
Right, it's not the Reform.
It's not Reform, right. And when you say conservative in this context, we're not talking like what we would say in politics.
Correct. Yeah,
It's just to clear that,
almost like traditional verse.
That's bad, right? But it's a little bit more what I would say, if you're familiar with Orthodoxy, which is if we're saying left and right, which is also not, but it's the easiest way to frame it up. Orthodoxy is probably more towards the righter end of the spectrum. Some people would argue that Reform is maybe a little bit more left of the spectrum, and in some ways, conservative Judaism rides the middle. But it's all getting very complicated and complex, and that's a very, very, very oversimplistic way of explaining things. But I was raised in conservative Judaism, had a bat mitzvah, and went to religious school and Hebrew school and the whole thing. Was actually confirmed in the synagogue, which, as you age, a lot of people don't tend to do, but I did. And grew up. I was really involved in my youth group. Had a really nice life here in Knoxville.
Would you say you had like it's funny, and I don't mean to, I don't think it's accurate to separate these two things, but I always want to ask, because I find some people, their spirituality sort of is the religious life that you're sort of describing growing up. Some people, it's like they have this other, I would put myself in that category. Like I had the religious life, but I also had like this internal spirituality. Okay, so that resonates with you?
It does. I mean, I think it's interesting now, because when you're growing up as a Jewish kid in Knoxville, and I didn't realize this at the time until I got older and had words for it, right? Okay. But there isn't a sense of being othered.
Oh, sure.
if you will.
Yeah.
And I think we're living in a time now where we're a lot more aware of different cultures, different people, different things. But
relative for Knoxville,
right? Relative for Knoxville, right? But when you grow up and you're maybe one of two or three in your whole grade, and maybe under 10 in an entire school, you don't. I didn't grow up thinking like, but you knew you were different,
sure.
And when you're younger, but I mean little, like I'm thinking of myself in like second grade right now when I'm saying little.
Yes.
So little. You don't have words or I didn't, and it's not that my parents didn't explain, this is why on Passover we're sending you to school and you have this matzah sandwich in your lunchbox. I knew why.
Right.
But I didn't have words to explain, but this is really why this happens and this is why we do this. It just made me feel different and I didn't like it. Right. And I have this whole thing about Passover, which is coming up. We could talk about that again. But this whole thing about how that idea of this is something that makes me different and I don't like it very much.
Yeah. don't want to be different.
Right.
Yeah.
Just, I can't really articulate why.
Mm-hmm.
But that, right, that sort of like wanting to dig deeper and wanting to figure things out and wanting to see, like, do I really, we're going to Hebrew school and we're doing all this stuff and we're learning these things. Is this what we think? Like, Is this what I think?
So you were confronting that stuff very early then.
I would say in high school.
Yeah.
Just this kind of grappling with how much of this is what you're told and what we learn and what we just do because we're Jews and that's it. Mm-hmm. And how much of it is, but really do I think this? Right? Do I think this?
Yeah.
And I mean, if we wait till the end of the answer is yes, I do. but how that translated as I got older became much different.
Yeah.
Very different.
It strikes me just as you're saying, like in some ways that uncomfortable like sense of being different is a gift too, because then it's almost like you were forced to evaluate and take seriously your faith earlier than most folks. Right. I mean, I was that way.
Right.
I for whatever reason, just naturally. Right. But like most people, I find, if you're just like you grow up Protestant in the South, like why would you question anything until you know what I mean? Until some sort of crisis
or you don't see things that look different than you, or you all of a sudden realize that maybe there is a part of you that is different than what you're being exposed to. Whether that's just, I mean, that could be lots of things, like, right? It could just be, I don't believe what they're saying politically.
Sure.
I could be queer. I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm being told that's
wrong. And is that okay in this context?
Is that okay in this context? Is this community supportive of that?
Right.
I don't believe what I'm hearing about this whatever. And
I had on a much lesser level growing up Episcopalians felt like that a little bit because you didn't fit anywhere, which we don't. It's like, well, you're kind of Catholic, but you're Protestant, and it's like, so you didn't. I didn't relate with what the real kind of evangelical kids were talking about, and yet I wasn't Catholic, and so there was a little much smaller level, but,
But it it's interesting, I think, growing up here and just lots of people, feel the same. And you don't feel exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way it's an interesting lens that sort of, for me, I don't want to say colored, but it very much influenced my life. Yeah. Pushing ahead for sure.
Would you say that questioning also then was tied into what, like, your relationship with God?
Yes.
So that questioning sort of pushed you to evaluate and probably like explore and experience that relationship.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And, for me, like when we talk about spirituality, I'm not a good prayer person. I have such a deep-rooted respect for people who can get in that place and just be there in prayer. Or, and some people, I think that's meditation. Maybe we call it different things. Never been good at it. Yeah. And like we could go into that too. Like in the beginning, it started for me just with liturgy. Yeah. Like being in conservative Judaism and what that actual prayer book said and looked like and how we approach it and Hebrew, and just that thing of like, for a lot of people, you never exactly, unless you're taking the time to really dig in there and figure out like, what is this saying and what does this mean? You could be speaking anything. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It doesn't, and there for a lot of people, it's a hard path to connection, right? Yeah. When you're like, I don't even know what I'm even saying. Yeah. That's fact. But now, like, I have a very different relationship with Hebrew now. But just that, that idea of ritual and liturgy and prayer and whatever, like, it's comforting to me, but it doesn't resonate with me in terms of like a practice. I'm jealous of people that it doesn't. It's not to say that I don't pray, because I do. Yeah. But sometimes. I am people who can easily get into that space. Yeah. And
when you say that space, do you mean like more meditative, like not just like prayerful. Now I lay me down to sleep, but
right? But like really, like whether it's like with liturgy that we're following and it's with a prayer book and we're reading and we're doing whatever, or meditative,
Yeah.
just able to shut it all down and shut off your mind and,
Yeah.
Just let other things happen. Mm-hmm. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard for me.
Is.
It's hard for me.
Yeah.
and I do try to work on it.
Uh-huh.
But I'm more of a, there's a book I actually just bought it. I haven't read it yet, but it's called God is a Verb.
Yeah.
And it's more about the idea of the doing and the action. Mm-hmm. And that's where I find myself like,
totally,
like when I'm sad or when I feel like, there's just like something's wrong and I need to make this be better, or there's a problem and I just can't fix it and I need it to be better. I always just make food for somebody.
I don't want to dive down Enneagram road, do you know Enneagram?
Oh, totally.
What are you?
What do you think I am?
Well, just by that statement,
Yeah.
It sounds like you go to health over in 2, which would maybe make you an 8.
I am such a 2.
You are.
I'm a hard 2.
Okay.
I sit like at any of those. I'm real big into all those assessments. So like,
but that like, when you need or when you are lacking something, you help.
Yeah.
Is very
Mm-hmm. But that's just I always have big feelings all the time.
You're touching on. I mean, one of my favorite conversations is about prayer.
Yeah.
And I love. I mean, like 100%. It's as if we teach people that prayer is only if you're sitting in a room somewhere by yourself quietly. And I love seeing people recognize that really, and it's actually something that I deeply admire about Judaism, viewing from afar. Obviously, I haven't been able to experience this, but my sense is people who listen to this are going to get so tired of me saying this, but I love to use the example of Jesus and the Eucharist. And it, that was, Jesus was saying, we're eating, we're breaking bread together with people we love. This is holy. Yeah. Right? That is prayer. Everything is prayer. Right. One of my kind of heroes, Richard Rohr, talks about like praying is not these words that come out. When Jesus went to the desert for 40 days and prayed for 4 days, he wasn't using words. Prayer is something else too. So but I do think from afar, again, if you disagree, tell me, that Judaism sort of, in a way, teaches people, embodies that, like, no, prayer is this thing that we live through together as a community.
100%.
This in liturgical churches like mine are much the same way. You go through the seasons, you go through this rhythm constantly. And though that doesn't look and feel like prayer the way we talk about it individually, that is this other, I think, version of like living prayer that I think is beautiful.
Right. Well, and I mean, in Judaism, there are certain prayers that you do not recite, you don't say, you don't do, unless you have the required amount of community. Yeah. And that, I mean, it used to be 10 men, right? And literally the term for that is minyan. If you've ever heard of that, like, I gotta go to minyan. Like, I've got to, or when we sit Shiva, when people die, right? There are things in, the plural is minyanim. And so, like, somebody be like, I gotta go pay a Shiva call. They're worried they're not going to have a minyan. Like, they're not going to have 10 people.
Have enough,
They're not going to have enough. Oh, gosh.
For that to be a prayer.
Okay, so, sorry. We're talking about this idea of, like, I got to go to Shiva because they're worried they're not going to have this number of people. That, to me, is beautiful. Amazing.
The body.
Right, the body. And, like, and that, to me, is where I do feel a spirituality. Okay. Right? Like, I do feel a connection. Like, even if it's like this, is there a God? I mean, I don't know. Maybe. But here's a person who has lost. Yeah. Like, who is in grief and is suffering, and we are showing up to just be there.
And we're going to walk together.
And to help them in this moment. And, and it doesn't matter what I think at this point. It just matters I'm here for somebody who needs that. And that, to me, is like, that's the Judaism I get behind. Yeah. And that's, and it's, I love it. My own personal story is it took me a long, long time to see that in church. I very naturally came to like the inner relationship and just had this sense of this thing we call God, right? And in my life. And I used to look at church and be like, this is a social club, or whatever. And it took me a long time until I saw exactly what you're pointing to, where it's like, no, this is it. Like walking with human beings through life, right? And recognizing the holy in
marriage and death and birth and all those things,
all of
sickness and celebration,
right?
and
all the details and all the moments, and being there, like being able to sit there when things aren't so good is, to me, that's holy.
Yeah. And then that gets us into that conversation of then, like, what isn't holy, right?
Oh,
like, what isn't spiritual, like this whole life experience journey we're on, in some sense, to me, like, yes, it's spiritual, the whole thing,
Right.
Right. So for you in your life, though, so you're pointing to growing up in the Jewish faith and feeling different, and you confronting sort of some of those questions early on, and that tell me more about those experience. Like, do you have sort of, God touchstone moments? Do you have any things you point to of like, these were like the most kind of quote unquote spiritual moments of my life?
I mean, I think so. I was very active. I mentioned in a particular youth group in high school that sort of has this leveling and rolls up into a whole international organization, whatever. So, this was back in the day, as we say. There was not social media. There wasn't phones and all the things. And if we wanted to see friends who lived in other places, we went to weekend retreats and conventions and conclaves and all that stuff. And I was able, starting locally and then regionally and ultimately nationally, internationally, to have these experiences where I was like, oh, like there are other people who have these experiences also.
Yeah. And
like we're hanging out and we're excited to be together and we're excited to be Jewish and there's more than 10 of us.
Yeah. Community.
Isn't that great? Like this is real community. And this is funny. If you look at my high school, my senior year, my annual from senior year, I'm not in it. I'm not in it. It's not that like I didn't have an okay high school experience. I mean, like, I didn't love high school, but I had lots of friends. I had lots of different friend groups. I was not a great student. It was fine. I mean, fine enough to be able to go to an out-of-state school, which I don't think I could have gotten into today, right? If I had to, like, I was kind of bored. Just, and I was one in the back of the class who was filling out the envelopes for the fundraiser for my youth group instead of doing work because that's what I wanted to be doing instead, right? So then, like, being in this place where this environment where there's lots of us now, and then ultimately like going to like a summer program where there's kids from all over the world, and being able to be like, oh, like this is something that really, I mean, that overused thing bigger than myself. Yeah. But it is when that's the first time for me when I was like, okay, like, and that I did start feeling comfortable in my skin. Yeah. Like that I did start feeling like, okay, so you can have this matzah in your lunchbox now. And maybe not be mad at it anymore. Yeah. Like, okay, like embracing it's okay identity. That it's here. Yeah. And we can figure out why it's here. And we understand more because we have a not second grade brain. Yeah. That's able to kind of to grapple with some of this stuff about like when we think about, I mean, we're coming up on Passover, right? But that story of being enslaved in Egypt and going, the Red Sea parting and coming out and Moses and the whole, and what does that mean? And then we're in the desert and then we get to the whole, if you know what you call your Old Testament, what I would call the Hebrew Bible, right? But like those things, like if you know that text and like kind of starting to put that together in a way that isn't so much like, did this really happen? Yeah. Well, I don't really care now if it really happened. Right. But I think it's a really nice story. Well, yeah. And that I think that we can learn, that we can pull from, and that I do believe that is ancestral. Right?
What are we to get from this?
What are we to learn? What are we to get? Yeah.
Man, the other thing that occurs to me with this is something I also think a lot about, which in some ways it's like, Judaism has preserved in a beautiful way what is now I can't speak to, I don't know what like numbers are in attendance, like if temple and synagogue attendance is dropping the way that Christianity is, but
I was going to say, we can get into that if you want, but the answer is yes.
Okay. Well, it just seems to me, though, that these, what do you call, like, rites of passage, ways we mark life. It's very well preserved, that system of doing that in Judaism. It's disintegrating in Christianity and in just culture in general. My wife's from Bolivia, and something that I'm always envious of about her culture is the cultural identity, totally separate from religious. I mean, that it overlaps, but it's very intact and strong, your culture identity. And that's just so beautiful, which is something we sort of flounder around. It's like, who am I? What am I? You know? Yeah. And I guess I'm just saying, I think like one really positive about this stuff, even though you struggled with it younger, is that identity is very solid. Like, you know, and that's powerful.
It is. And I think you got to stick with it.
Oh, yeah. Right? Well, sure. Yeah. You could reject. Yeah.
I mean, I told you, right, that my mom converted and she was Catholic. And part of the largest reason that she did so was because she went to Catholic schools growing up and was always told, you know, she would question and she would always be told, we don't ask questions. We don't question. And I mean, and she grew up with the nuns who hit you with rulers. Yeah. You know, we don't ask those questions. And that never sat real well with her. And so I think for me, it's always just being able, and it's one of the things I do love about Judaism is that we're a people of questions and struggle. Yeah. And, you know, when people who are really into text study, and I don't just mean, you know, clergy but people who really take text study seriously, do it in partnership. You know, they do it like what we're doing now, right? Like talking and grappling and struggling and arguing and, you know, really
what's the
position, like taking positions on things and challenging each other.
Right.
And
there's a whole text. I forgot what's the
Talmud. Are you talking about Talmud?
Midrash.
Oh, Midrash is stories, right? Like,
how the reason you reminded me of it and what I love about it. Now, maybe I'm characterizing this wrong, but I always use Midrash as an example of what you're talking about because it's I guess traditionally it was rabbis would like write back and forth arguing about a text, but then that conversation in and of itself almost got valued like holy sort text
of, right?
in a way, right?
So actually, that's Talmud. The whole the commentary, the rabbinic commentary on Torah. Is actually that's Talmud, and Midrash is kind of part of it. So, but Midrash is fascinating to me because Midrash are stories. Yeah, those are things that they make up, right, to explain. Like, okay, so like Moses smashes his father's, or Abraham smashes his father's idols, right?
Yeah, it's like they'll tell a story.
That's not in text.
Right.
That is not like anywhere in actual text, but it's these stories that people make up to sort of explain, color in of like, how do we get from here to there and what's really happening and that stuff. I mean,
but it's almost
you still have people
treated
who
as
will write that today, right? Like there are people, if you ever read The Red Tent,
I know it.
But you know the whole premise of it, right? Is that it's in the Bible, the only daughter of Jacob who is mentioned is Dinah. We know he has 12 sons, but the only daughter we hear about is Dinah. Right. Which has to be, I think, a bit preposterous, right? Like if he's got 4 women bearing his children, that he has 12 sons. Odds are probably right. Meh. But the whole thing of the Red Tent, people would argue some have argued that is a modern midrash because it's the story of Egypt told from her perspective. Not you know, and that it's fiction. Right. There's no whatever. So
but my point is that at least my understanding is that story in itself almost ends up getting treated as scripture. Like it's honored and revered and it's holy in a sense. Yes. And I love that because it breaks people from this black and white. It's the questioning. It's the freedom to play with scripture.
What might this have been?
Right. I would compare it to Saint Ignatius. You know, in Ignatian spirituality, they have a thing called praying with imagination. So these guys will take scripture and they'll write it from a different perspective, as if they're there, or from the perspective of a different character. And it's just such a deep and beautiful way to enter into those texts. But anyway, my whole point was just to say that it's not so like rigid. Yeah. You know, it's much more broad, you know.
Absolutely. But you got to keep going.
Yeah,
right? Like that. I mean, that's the whole. You know, when I worked with teenagers, and that was sort of always my, I don't want to say charge to them, but the thing when we would talk about, you know, where you sit with things, I wouldn't want to go through my life with the education that I had in second grade. Right? Like you wouldn't as adults, right? Like we don't approach life with, or let's even say, we'll say seventh grade, because typically what happens is kids get bar or bat mitzvahed, or now we have b'nai mitzvah for kids who are, you know, in some maybe not binary in their gender, that you're seventh grade, you're 13. Yeah. I wouldn't want to approach my life with the knowledge that everything stopped in seventh grade, that we stop learning, we stop, you know, but that's unfortunately for a long time now kind of what we see in Judaism writ large, right? That there's this we just sort of have this milestone and we do a thing and whatever, and now we're done here. Yeah. And I don't think it works like that. Yeah. I mean, I don't personally wish to approach my life like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that almost seems sometimes as if, you know, everyone's on a different kind of timeline and journey, and some people never make it past that, like those basic, the basic core beliefs. Some people never make it to that place where they question the way that you did growing up. Total personal aside, I have to confess, you mentioning bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs. And one of my, I'm not exaggerating this. It sounds weird to say, but one of my biggest regrets is, her name was Amanda, in seventh grade, invited me to her bat mitzvah. Yeah. And for no real reason, I didn't go. I just didn't. I'm kind of shy. I didn't want to go to something I didn't know, whatever. Right. And I have always regretted that. I've never been to a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. That was the only. Yeah, that's the only one I ever got. Change that. I would love to. It's the only one I ever got invited to.
Now all my friends' kids are going. Yeah. So we definitely find you an invite.
Both from my experience, but also, and it touches a little bit of what you were talking about. Like now, I look back and go, like, man, I hope that didn't hurt her feelings or didn't, you know, make her, you know what I mean?
Sure.
I regret that. Well, anyway.
Yeah. That's
confession with Father Brett.
That whole process is it's an interesting thing also, right? Because typically what happens is there's the thing that we do in like the religious ceremony and passage and rite of passage and things that happen. And then there's a big party. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so it's always, you know, I think, and most of like, now that I have friends who have kids who are going to them, friends who are not Jewish but who have been invited, they're like, you know, what do we do? Do we go to both? And I was like, well, I tell you, if it were me, I would tell your kid that if they want to go to the party, they have to go to the ceremony.
Yeah, of course.
You have to do both, right? Like if you want to do this, you got to do both. And I think we've gotten better at it. You know, I think that like as far as like Judaism writ large goes, we've gotten much better about how we explain things, how we show up to things, whatever. I mean, and also, you can watch anything on TV now. Like, you know, like, but it wasn't like that then. Right. I mean, and I would argue, like, even for you growing up, right? Like, you're younger than I am. But even then, there wasn't, like, you couldn't see whatever you wanted whenever you wanted to.
Of course. Well, and I just mean it from the perspective, like you were saying, like, growing up feeling different. I hope that by my not going, I didn't contribute to that sense. If she had that, you know, I know. It's just, this is confession with Brett. I mean,
I don't know Amanda. I don't.
Yeah.
If you're still in touch with her, maybe you should call her.
You can't speak to that. Yeah. I know, right? Maybe you should make amends. Okay, but so moving from, so that sort of brings us into what, high school, college?
Yeah.
What about like what are those, do you have places you point to in life where God's presence was very clear to you? You have those touchstone moments.
I always think about it in retrospect.
Of course.
And I should never say never. I have not had clear moments in my life where people were like, that was, when people speak like, God talked to me, God spoke to me, God showed me, God did.
Right.
Not so much for me.
Yeah.
But certainly when I think about like, things that happened and it was this, not that, or that so could have gone this other way and it didn't. Or why did that happen? And some of those, why did that happen? I don't know if we ever know, right? But certainly certain people that I've met or when they've come into my life or, how that all worked, God, the universe, whatever we want to call it. I still struggle with this idea of like a God.
Yeah. What does that even mean?
Like, what does that even mean? But in terms of just like there is energy in the world that is influencing things, and I don't understand what that is. Yeah. I can't see it. I can't really touch it. Sometimes I think I can feel it. Yeah. I think. Right. I think I can.
I'm with you. Yeah.
But as far as like, the whole man on the cloud with the beard, no.
Yes.
But in terms of just, do I think that like what happened at a certain point was, we'll say godly, for lack of a better word, holy, meant to be, influenced by, whatever, I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's actually one of my favorite, and I'm right with you. I mean, that's why I know it gets annoying, but I'm always saying like quote unquote spiritual or like God, whatever that means, because these words, we don't have a real solid understanding of what they are. They're really kind of placeholders. I love, a couple things. What you're pointing to is one of my favorite ways actually to hear about people's spirituality because, and it's come through this podcast where I get to see the long arc of the story, and you get to see those, look back and go, oh yeah, whatever God is, this was right. There seems to be some sort of sense in our story somehow.
Right.
Also to that, I something I love. I love like, again, I might be totally misexplaining this, but my sense like in Judaism of like, not actually saying God is a placeholder. You're not actually saying the name of God, right? And that's out of reverence and respect. And it's also out of this understanding that we can't even begin to fathom what that means when we say it. Right. So like traditionally you wouldn't even write out God, right? Or like that's something I love about Buddhism. Like Buddhism sort of says, all that stuff, don't worry about it, because you can't even know. Let's worry about this, right?
Right. Well, and in the Hebrew, here comes the dog. In the Hebrew,
hi Bubs.
Hi Mel Dog. The letters that you see like in the prayer book, there are these 4 letters, and the letters are Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. But the word you say is typically Adonai. Yeah. That is not those letters. Right. Like that's Yahweh. Not like, but it's not even that, not really, you know, like it. And like the best explanation that I have ever heard is like when people are like, well, what does that sound like? Like that it sounds like breath.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
It just sounds like breathing, which like gets me back to the whole
love that.
The meditation and the whatever. And I do try. And I do breath work and I do those things.
And that gets back to this idea that this is holy right here, breathing. Yeah, right.
Just,
that this is
being in rooms and sharing space with people.
It's so. That's one of my favorite teachings. I have a Hebrew professor friend that tells me that that's bogus, but I refuse to believe him, Dr. Adam. And then shout out to William Similarly. In my office, I have a picture of lungs. It's an art thing, and it has the Yahweh, I guess consonants, right?
Yeah. Well, the consonants.
Right, because there's no,
Right. But, I think that also just starts getting into a little bit more of, when you talk about arc and you talk about like just that learning of, that doesn't, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Ask me something else.
No, it's okay. Well, for me, where it goes, what I love about it is it takes me to this place of, which I'd be curious to hear, what you would think growing up in Judaism about this perspective. But at least in Christianity, there's a lot of, and we don't need to talk about why this is there, but there's a lot of like that sense of we're bad or dirty or sinful, right? And so when we talk the way we're talking about everything being holy, breath being holy, and really Christianity teaches this in incarnation, right? If God, would come down, and I would say this about the Ark of the Covenant or God in the cloud, or like, to me, the whole message is God saying, I want to be with you. No, you're not bad or dirty. Like, I want relationship with you. You are holy. But that Christianity struggles with that, and so I really love those kind of teachings, because that breath teaching, you can't understand that and then still go, but I'm not worthy or I'm not good. No, God is in you and around you and with you, and whatever that God thing is, it's there always.
Well, so this is an interesting sort of segue, but I was thinking, when we just had our little intro phone call, and you had asked some questions, and it just made me think about, like, so in Judaism, right, the calendar, the Hebrew calendar is lunar, not solar, right? So when we think about, and some people know this, but for Jews and in Judaism, Rosh Hashanah, or technically Rosh Hashanah is how we would say that technically, is the head of the year. That's what it means. Like, Rosh is head and Hashanah is the year. It's the new year. Is in the fall. It's typically starts in, September-ish.
Right.
And it's different all the time because of the moon, right? That's why it's never on the same year or on the same day of the year. Like, Christmas is always December 25th. Not Jewish holidays.
But Passover moves.
Passover moves,
right.
Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah moves,
right.
Like all of that moves.
So our calendars, the church calendar is based on the same.
Right,
because we've overlaid onto Judaism.
Exactly, but that's why Easter typically falls. Now, not this year because we have a leap year in the Hebrew calendar, but Easter is typically around Passover.
Right. And then we build the rest of the calendar back, dependent upon Easter.
Right. So for me, as far as just like moving through life, and like when we think about spirituality and what makes sense to me, the Hebrew calendar has always made more sense spiritually.
Oh, yeah.
Than the Gregorian calendar.
Yeah.
Or, the regular calendar or whatever,
Say more about that.
That I think I always notice the moon. Like, I'm not like this. I appreciate nature. I love nature. I live where I live because I think it's a beautiful place to live. I mean, and I'm saying like East Tennessee, also this neighborhood, all of it. I love that. I don't go into nature much. I mean, I do. Like, I'm sounding like I'm not a couch potato, but I mean, I am not that person that's like always hiking, always biking.
Yeah.
Fitness is important to me. I go to a gym. I'm not, I mean, I love being outside. I love seeing nature. I like always want to have places with windows and all those things. But when we think about that, the calendar actually starts in the fall, and that we move sort of like into this like retrospective kind of darker place, and then we hit Hanukkah, and it's literally the shortest days of the year, and the rituals around Hanukkah, we bring more light every time we light the candle, right? Like, there's something really lovely to me about that idea of like, during our darkest, shortest, coldest days, we're doing. We kind of move from that into like these festival seasons of sort of like, the big ones I'm skipping over, but like it's Purim, which a lot of people know is the book of Esther. We're in it right now, and that's like a festival that, is about religious freedom and the othering and standing up and, doing what you feel is right and against enormous foes and all of that. And especially for this year, I think it carries a lot also. I mean, just where we are with everything in Israel and in the Hamas Gaza thing, and we're not going to talk about that. We can if you want, but not right now. But, I mean, but just like what I think, as a Jewish person walking the earth, there's a lot that weighs heavy right now. There's a lot that weighs heavy as we go into Passover.
For sure.
And, you know, when everything is beautiful and blooming and it's spring and it's gorgeous and it's all about renewal and life and all those things. And what's interesting is, you know, the month before the Jewish high holidays, which is, we talked about Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And that period of time is the most spiritually, you know, deep time for Jews.
Right.
For observant Jews, you know, for people who are really thinking about those things. And the month leading up to that in the Hebrew calendar is a month called Elul. That is the only month in the Hebrew calendar that does not have a holiday or festival. And that idea is, you know, one of the teachings is that they say the king is in the field. You know, that time before we move into the new year and these days of awe, that's when God, whatever we call God, but that is particularly close.
Yeah.
Like that's if you want, right? Like that
the veil
particularly
is
close.
thin.
So like you know, going out into the field, right? And like being there and experiencing and doing. The veil is thin, right? I just dig that. I just think that that's so cool.
Yeah.
And and that whole thing that I just talked about resonates and makes sense to me.
Yeah.
In a way that's starting on January 1st.
Well, of course.
Not.
Well, yeah, because there's no there's just numbers, right?
Yeah.
And like, 100%. I mean,
like
coming
the
from a
move through
liturgical background, same thing.
Yeah.
When you live in this, you know, it really is. There's parallels, right? Because I live in a world that is, we got our regular calendar, and then I have my liturgical calendar, and the liturgical calendar calls me into year after year to go on this inner journey. Right? Because we're remembering and reliving the story, you know, the story, you know, what has happened before us, and yet we're called into experiencing those things as well.
Absolutely.
Right? So, that's very important in my life as well. Yeah, for sure. So, I asked you about like, you know, do you have, you know, and you talked about sort of the arc of your story. So do you have places when you look back that you would name where you're like, oh yeah. And you can say no, and you can say, I can't think of it right now. But, you know, when you look back, what are some examples of those? Like, God was there in my life.
I was in a job that abruptly ended, we'll just say. And I didn't want it to.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of drama around why it happened, and I would have loved the opportunity to have stuck around, and then was not given that opportunity. And it ended up being the best thing ever. I have a dear friend who is actually a pulpit rabbi in Denver, who at the time that this happened was extremely pregnant and going through ultimately a situation where her mother was dying, had pancreatic cancer and was dying. And I joke with my friends about Judith stories that take way too long to tell. So I'm trying to I'm trying to self-edit this a little bit.
Yeah.
But basically I get given the opportunity to be what I called fun employed. Okay. So for about 6 months, I did a little bit of contract work, just kind of I don't want to say hit pause, but certainly was pumping the brakes a little. I'm just like, really, what are we going to do here now? This wasn't how we thought things were going to be at all. But what are we really doing here? So let's just, I don't want to say sabbatical, but let's just be fun employed.
Yeah.
Wake up late, do a few things, have some projects, look around, you know, take a few long weekends. Let's just do some stuff.
Yeah.
And at the time, this friend of mine, who her name is Emily, is very pregnant and working at a summer camp for the organization, the Jewish organization we both used to work for.
Yeah.
Go up there. I visit her. She's so pregnant. She's miserable. I mean, and I end up just coming back here, and she calls me and she said, I decided that I just wanted to go home. I needed to go, and home at that point, all her stuff was in Denver, but she was finishing rabbinical school in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so all her stuff is in Denver. She calls her parents and says, I got to get out of here. They've my stuff is done. I can go. It's cool. And her mom said, great, because I just got this diagnosis. So come home right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of things ensued, and everybody thought they were going to need to move to Denver and be in Denver and do all the stuff in Denver. And it was very chaotic. And ultimately what they realized is it wasn't going to Emily needed to be back in LA.
Yeah.
But at this point she's very pregnant and she can't go by herself. And she called me and she said, look, I gotta drive from Denver to LA, but I can't do it. Can you come tomorrow? If we buy the ticket, can you fly tomorrow?
Yeah.
And drive with me to LA, and then we'll fly you back to Knoxville. And I was like, of course I can. I'm convinced that I lost my job
to be
able to say right then, of course I can.
Yeah. Because when else could you do that?
When else would I have been able to do that? Well, of course.
Yeah.
And maybe that sounds silly, I think to some people it's not, but I'm just that's why that happened.
Yeah.
When else could I just be sure. Absolutely. I will do that right now.
Yeah. And that I don't know, this isn't the same thing, but it makes me think about how people experience what people would say coincidence or synchronicities or whatever. And I take those things very seriously. And I guess if you push me, because you've made a couple comments that I think were kind of similar in that, even though I'm a person of faith, I'm also a very skeptical, cynical, analytical person.
I'm always Gen X all the way, baby.
I'm always doubting
I'm always just
devil's advocate stuff. And,
yes.
Yeah. It's just interesting to me how people often choose to take a story like that and then explain it away. I guess if you push me far enough, I sort of go, even if at the end that's all bogus, I still 100% would rather choose to live that way than not. Right? To live with that meaning and that purpose and that, I don't know, I don't even have the words to put around it, than to just think it's all nothingness.
Yeah.
And
it's just nothing. There's no coincidence.
Well, that was nice that you could go be there for your friend, Nice little coincidence.
It was nice, and also
But I can't look at it that way.
No, absolutely not. We're just being in certain places at certain times, or not being in places at certain times, and why that happened.
Yeah,
literal. If I had come 5 minutes earlier, this would have happened. If I had come 5 minutes later. This would have happened. Oh, I was 5 minutes late because I realized I left that thing and I had to go back, and then I went back and there was a giant wreck. Whatever. But this sort of things where I'm maybe, but
yes. And yet, this also, these are big conversations that we're just keep touching on, but that thinking also gets us into the place of, which is uncomfortable for me, and it feels sort of dangerous because I'm also not willing to say, most days I'm not willing to say that then therefore everything happens with purpose and reason, and God
everything is
pulling the strings.
Right.
So your friend's mom having pancreatic cancer, I'm not willing to be that was all for a
right.
Now maybe that's just because I just don't want to say that or look at God that way. But
I think we absolutely that everything is preordained, everything is predetermined. There is no chance, there is no every single. Then that's not an exactly delightful way to walk through life either to me, because then that we don't have choice, we don't have free will, we don't. I don't know. We could go on and on for that for forever.
I know, yeah, and that's the thing, right? Where it's for me, it's easy for me to wrap my head around this thing, there being this creator somehow, however we want to define that.
Yeah.
That is we say the clockworker God or whatever. That everything comes from and puts in motion. But we say that, and we say, and that thing that is bigger than, is undefinable, also plays a part in my life.
Yeah.
And I believe that because I've experienced it.
Yeah.
I can't justify or explain or
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
because it doesn't make sense.
Well, right. That's what my friend Emily would say is like, as I would imagine as clergy, you also get, do you believe in God? Like,
Yeah.
do you believe in God?
Yeah.
Do you believe? And she gets that
Yeah,
question.
you really believe all this stuff?
Do you
you preach?
believe?
Yeah.
Do you? And
Most days.
And usually
most
she
days.
says, I believe in God. I don't understand God.
Yeah. Right.
Right. I believe in God. I don't understand God. And I think that that's as best an answer I know.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, and belief, like we've taken that word and for whatever reason, we've conflated it with knowing now as if like belief means fact or we know. Like if you really pay attention to when people say, I believe this, that's what they're saying.
Right.
When belief.
Or faith means knowing. I mean, that's the,
when those things are not, like you're supposed, it's actually quite the opposite. Faith and belief are struggle. It's not, it's a relationship of struggle. I love, again, tell me if this is a gross, like, simplification of the story, but I often pull on, the name Israel, right? Jacob wrestling in the desert.
Yeah.
Jacob.
Yeah.
And being named Israel. Well,
after struggling with the angel.
Yeah. And Israel means wrestling. Was it wrestles with God or wrestles with
struggles with God? Yeah.
Right. And so like,
and that's we get that when people say the people Israel, right?
Yeah,
like that's the whole.
Of course, but I'm sorry that name wasn't just given because he literally wrestled with. There's meaning in that. So like, the fact that as we would say the chosen people, right, are given that name, that tells you a lot about what faith and belief is. It's a struggle with God. It's a relationship. It's not. This is what you believe. Okay, good deal. Black and white, all done. Yeah. Knowing. No, it's struggle.
Absolutely.
It's that lifelong relationship. Man, you got me preaching.
Well, we don't ever get to know. Well,
yeah.
I don't know. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what about? I know I'm mindful of your time this morning, but what?
I can do this all day.
It's gone so fast.
You want another Judith story?
Just
we could be here all day.
I do. That's what I was about to ask. Do you have like anything else from your life that you would just your big kind of whatever you would call spiritual?
Well, like the biggest spiritual moments. Okay, so I told you I used to work for an organization that was for Jewish teenagers, and part of my job was that I did a teen tour to Israel for 4 summers. I took people's most precious things. They trusted me with their children in the Middle East for 3 weeks.
Little devils. I mean, I've taken them to Bolivia before. It's not fun.
I'm telling you. I mean, it was a real time to be alive, let me tell you. So have you been ever?
No, I haven't. My parents just went and won't.
So that puts that on the list because I don't care, religious or not, I don't care who you are, just that whole idea of being in a place that is so central to so many major world religions, and also just seeing like Fertile Crescent and commerce and trade routes and all all of it. It'll blow your mind.
Yeah, my parents say it's as if it's palpable.
Yeah,
when
it is.
Go there.
I mean, when you think about just like Asia, Africa, Europe, how it all sort of comes together and how you can just, it's unbelievable. But this particular year, are you familiar with the Jewish observance called Tisha B'Av? Okay, so.
Was a world religion major, but it's left me.
So Av is a month on the Hebrew calendar, the month of Av. And Tisha is 9. Okay, so the 9th of Av. Okay, so like the Ides of March or whatever. Yeah. The 9th of Av is a day that historically many terrible things have befallen the Jewish people. The destruction of both the temples happened.
Yes,
there's an expulsion of the worst. I get it. Like there's a whole list of terrible things that happened on the 9th of Av.
Right.
So it is a big day of mourning.
Yes.
In the Jewish community. Yes, it's a big day of mourning in the Jewish community. And this particular year, and it usually happens in July-ish, sometimes August, but around there, because, the calendar, we talked about it. We were in Israel on Tisha B'Av, and so we took this group to the Kotel, the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, whatever we want to call it, but the remaining wall of the ancient Holy Temple, the holiest of holy sites for many, 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 many millions of Jews worldwide. And that in and of itself, right? As young Jews, we are taught We go there, when you see it and you pray, oh my God, it's going to change your life. It's going to be life changing.
It's built up.
Built up as a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I had been there before. This was not my first time visiting what I call the Cotel.
Yeah.
Okay, so not my first time. But for many of the teens, it was their first time in the country. So this could have been, well, I think it doesn't matter. But that idea of going and, it built up for you for so much. And some of them are just like, what if I get up? Like, what if I go and I'm praying, I'm trying to, and I just think it's a wall.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, then you just think it's a wall.
Yeah.
Like you do, right? So we go there on this, it is packed. It's the holiest of holy days. There's people, that's when we read Lamentations.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff there. And when I said to them, I was just like, it doesn't matter. Like, you might not even be able to get up to the wall.
Right.
Because it's going to be so crowded.
Right.
But count languages. Just sit and this idea of Jews have been coming here for thousands of years. And, people will write notes, their most intimate prayers, and stick them in the crevices. And this has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years that people are coming. And these, all of this, we talk about things like generational trauma and generational memory and all this.
Sure.
Go to the Cotel. Yeah. Trust me on that. Because when you experience these literal things that are stacked up like stones, right? And just seeing so many people in so many different ways of dress and so many different languages, like I said, I just said, just sit and see how it makes you feel. And funny how we conclude how we started, sort of, but that idea of I'm not just one of 10 people.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
That I'm not just, and it is bigger.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's I love that story. In that, it makes me go in a couple places, but yes, the identity part I see, but also that sense of bigger. I don't know. I do a lot of thinking recently about this, where it's so to take that example of that story, this place has this history. It's holy for that reason. We go there. It's sort of like we're talking about the calendar. There's what was, and then there's the holy of what is right now in that place, to your point, right? Okay, yes, there's the historical holiness of it, but take in the moment of the holiness that's happening right before your eyes, Yep. How does, this might be a big question, but I don't even know. It's too big to even for me to add. What would you say Judaism says about what is holy today?
Oh God.
It's and maybe you don't even have to try to answer it. I guess I guess I'll just explain. I've been toying a lot with the things I work with are Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, New Testament. So you get this sense to the point of the arc of the story in your life or my life. You see that in Scripture, I feel. And then I've really been pondering these days, what's the rest of the story? Yeah. Right? So for for us as Christians, it sort of ends, you have Pentecost and then you have okay, and then Paul did a bunch of stuff and you have the disciples and then what? What's the rest of the story? Right. And it's sort of in the people, right? It's what
I think it is. I think,
but we don't write it down anymore, and we don't. It's. I don't know.
Well, you and I don't, but maybe how do we know somebody's?
Yeah.
We don't know who's running around here, Brad. But to that point, right? I think it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
I think if you ask somebody who is very observantly, ultra-orthodoxly Jewish, they're going to say, it's what it's always been. The Torah is holy. This is what we do. This is how we live. This tells us how to live our life. I'm jealous of that sometimes. That's real easy.
Yeah.
Here it is.
It's very clear.
Here's the book.
I know.
This is if you follow this to the T, you are holy. You're living a holy life. You're doing what you're supposed to do. God loves you. Hooray for you. Feels a little not okay with me, but for people who live that life,
it's very clear.
Very clear. We have these commandments. We call them mitzvot, a mitzvah. If you've ever heard, this is what we do. You do these things.
Yep.
This is life. This is what we do.
Right.
to people who are like, it's all a bunch of hooey. I don't, it doesn't matter to me, but I live my life in such a way that I think it's holy.
Yeah.
I could care less about text. I'm not saying me, but like could care, but I'm going to do good. I'm going to do good work. I'm going to do acts of justice.
Kind of secular humanist.
There are congregations, right, that are founded on the idea of social justice.
Right.
And there are people coming together to do that work, whatever. To them, I would say that is very holy. And for me, it's always in the middle.
Yeah.
Always.
I like the middle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, for me, it's always gray.
Yes. Yeah.
It's always gray.
For sure.
Which is sometimes frustrating, but usually pretty interesting.
It is. We have a lot of overlap with certain things like that. I failed to say it earlier. I promise I'll be quiet. But the Episcopal Church seems very similar in some ways to growing up conservative Jewish because, it's like you're not going to be happy in the Episcopal Church if you want black and white. It's not there.
Nope.
And that's my theory as to why we're kind of small.
Yeah.
Because you have to be a person who's looking to almost be a seeker, to ask the questions, to not have like the answer just given to you.
Yeah.
It seems similar in a way.
Yeah.
But it's not full bore, like sort of, I don't know, the word reform or progressive but yeah. Okay. I know you have to go somewhere soon, but so anything else that you would name from Judith's life that's like,
oh gosh,
here's God, or where are you experiencing that today?
I think for me now, God is in the relationships that I build and the people in my life. And I think it gets back to that community piece. We're not supposed to do it all by ourselves. And I think it's about, the connections that we build with each other and regardless how we're supporting each other. I think now it's, and not just if we talk about the current state of affairs in the Middle East, but just our world writ large and how much terrible, terrible agony and grief and suffering there is for so many people that we got to see each other.
Yeah, it's I agree. It's in part it's sort of why I love doing this with people because it's similar to what we've been dancing around the whole time. It's like, yes, relationship with humans is holy. It's messy as all hell, but it's also holy. And but yet we have to do this. We have to because you can, just like in worship, you can be in a relationship with someone and it be just total surface level. They can be your best friend forever. And you never really even go much deeper.
Right.
Or you can be open and honest and vulnerable and go into much deeper places in your relationships with folks and that be deeply holy,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's kind of how I'm trying to get through it all.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I don't think you have anything to plug at all. No, right? Business.
No, I mean,
but that
come to the Thought Bureau for all your marketing, branding, and communication needs.
Okay, good.
I think we're real good at it, but no, I don't have anything to plug. I just
awesome.
I plug being kind.
Yeah.
Everyone just be nice. Please.
Being kind is cool.
Yeah, everyone just be nice.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
Awesome.
Please. Yeah.
Well, Judith, thank you for, again, inviting me into your home and journeying with me. And it's been a joy just to chat and get to know your story and play around with these ideas.
Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. If you ever want to come on again or someone that would want to, let me know. It'd be great to have you.
Great.
So,
thanks so
Judith.
much.